when you were working at the, what was it called, the newspaper, the high school newspaper?
Static.
Static. The Diefenbaker came by, and that was the first time
Yeah.
you interviewed him?
Wasn't the first time I met him.
When was the first time you met him?
When I was in the STU.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he came to review this unit.
He's Prime Minister.
Yeah. Yeah. And anyway, at the end of his visit, he got into a convertible, and so outside of this hangar, which was where he reviewed, there were people lined up along the streets to applaud and wave or whatever, you know. Major Code had told me to, when the car was ready, to go out and make sure that everybody was out of the way. So I got the signal, and I zapped open the door and strode out in front and started shouting, "Make way for the President, make way for the President." And the car stopped. And Diefenbaker said, "Young man, come here." And I went over and he said, "I'm Prime Minister. Prime Minister." That was the first time I met him. Then I interviewed him. Actually, I interviewed him when I was at CHCH too. Because he was a great interview in the sense that you could ask him for a sound bite. You could say, "I've got 20 seconds," and he'd give you a 20-second sound bite. You give him 8 seconds, he could give you something in 8 seconds. And when I was at CHCH, I actually had a clip that was 8 seconds with him. I mean, he knew right to a T.
So when you interviewed him for the high school paper,
Yeah.
do you remember anything interesting about that?
Oh, yeah, I remember talking to him about, you know, what he thought of the youth of Canada, you know, pretty stupid stuff on my part. And this was after my STU, so he knew me. Then I met Diefenbaker when we went out to Prince Albert's, Les Perry and I, because I had come up with this idea of doing a series of radio vignettes based on First Nation people. And they'd be 2-minute vignettes that would tell the tale of major Indian political figures, which we wanted Diefenbaker to voice, because he had given the vote to the Indians, and, you know, because of his nickname, the Chief, I thought it was a natural, and Les agreed. And anyway, we went up to see Diefenbaker, and I got introduced as Roger Warner. The way Diefenbaker heard it, I became Dr. Warner. So every time that I went up after that, he called me Dr. Warner, which I thought was sort of neat. A few years later, I was back in Ottawa and sold Indian Affairs on the idea of doing the same thing. So I had to approach Diefenbaker again. And again, Ken Kelly, who was my boss, was just flabbergasted because Diefenbaker remembered me, called me by name, and threw in this doctor, which Ken had never heard, and talked about, because he remembered right back to this make way for the president, make way for the president, and the school interviews. So, you know, we had this long history. It really helped my stature initially in my department, quite frankly. But we had to get the approval of the then Minister of Indian Affairs, who was Jake Epps. Because Diefenbaker was no longer leader of the opposition, he was just an MP. Anyway, we made this presentation to Jake Epps, and he promised that he would look into it and think about it. So a couple of days later, Ken called me and all excited because we had got the approval. And myself and this Brian guy, who had helped me on doing some of the writing, we went out that night and were quite happy. Anyway, I woke up the next morning and hopped in the car because he'd come and pick me up. I was in a good mood, and he looked at me and he said, "You obviously haven't heard. Diefenbaker just died." We had got the approval the day before, and then boom. And that was the end of my Diefenbaker connection.